Alrighty, guys. So, kind of an update on what's going on with my tanks nowadays, because I haven't put up a video in a while. No more 90 gallon. I actually instead sold it. Used to sit right there. It was just too much tank for what I had for space. Loved the tank, but my neighbor could use it a little bit more than I could for his Oscars. I instead went with the 55, which I just really like this size. It's not too big, but it's not too small either. Basically, what's going on in this tank, I am not using a dirt substrate. Instead, I am using Floramax down here, which you can see Mr. Pictus catfish from the 90 gallon, which was my test fish to test the water, is still chilling. Anyways, so I have Floramax in here. The tank's been running for about 4 weeks now, which I'll actually post some pictures of what the tank started out as versus what I've had for new growth. Because unfortunately I didn't make a video when I actually set this up. I just took some pictures of it. But there is some definitely huge signs of growth with all of these plants. The other thing is that I am dosing this tank with Flourish. Kind of their one that kind of covers all the different nutrients. Mainly, I started dosing it probably a little earlier than I felt I should, since it was a newer tank with newer substrate. Because I had a white hair algae problem start to take onto the tank. So, fortunately, I upgraded my cleaning crew to add in some Cory cats, albinos, and then I moved one of my albino Placos from my cichlid tank into here, since I had 3 in there. And since then, pretty much no algae issues at all. I kind of rushed setting up the tank a lot because I had all these plants from a pitch auction I went to, and they were just starting to look kind of sad, and I really needed to get this done. But aside from that, no issues. After that, there's no more algae problems in the tank. I did cut my light cycle down to only about 6 to 7 hours a day. So it's really only running during the time that I'm awake, and that's about it. The new plants I got at the auction that weren't in the 90 gallon is this huge, gigantic Anubias, which I fell in love with the second I saw it. It's just ridiculously large. To give you kind of a scoop of how big it is, you can start to see the top of the water, and the biggest leaves on it, tallest leaves on it, are more than halfway up to the water. The other ones I got were some nice little petite Anubias, and then also some Crypts, which were kind of my first attempt, and I got a massive amount of Crypts. Some of them did melt away, and I know that they have a tendency they can grow back, but I started seeing on the root structure that they were even melting, and I just figured they were kind of done for. But what is left in my tank is looking awesome. I think by far my favorite Crypts are these guys that are right here that I have the camera on, are just kind of spiraling. They kind of have this curve to them, which looks awesome. This is a plant I actually got after the auction. This one in the background, this is actually some cutoffs from this bigger one back here, which is Rotella indica. So you can tell it used to have the pink, and it just kind of actually kept going up from there. It had a whole bunch of stems on it. I took 3 of the stems off of it, put them in over here, and kind of the rest is history. They've about doubled in size in 2 weeks. These guys look really similar to the Rotella, but they're not Rotella. I'm actually not sure what the guy said they were. These were actually clippings I got about 4 weeks ago at the auction that were just given to me. I started off with 4 of them. I now have actually 7 in the tank. And the 7 that I had were actually about half the size of these. And they just keep growing and growing and growing. Which is kind of awesome because I'm kind of going to do a little carpet effect where I'm going to keep cutting them down to a certain length and keep planting them kind of all in a little bit of some of the empty spaces in here to give kind of just a cool look. Again, more crypts. That's more Anubias. Wisteria. This plant started off about, again, half the size. There's 4 stems in there. And it's just taken off. Like to the point where I've decided that it's awesome to cover up some of my filtration units with because it's just so bushy and looks awesome. I have some little crypts down here. These guys were actually just straggling along in the bag. They were basically just stems. Stuck them down into the substrate, and that's kind of what I got. Were these little crypts starting to form up. So, gotta be doing something right. The only thing I still can't really get to take off in my tank is my Scarlet Temples. These guys they're kind of just there. They haven't really shown any signs of new growth. There's some very, very small root structure growing off the stems to gain in nutrients. I think they're just kind of struggling along. I can't really figure out what it is. I've read temperature ranges and what they need to actually go off of, and as far as nutrients, and I basically just kind of run out of options. At this point, I know they kind of take a while sometimes in people's tanks to take off, and I'm just kind of wait to see if they actually will or not. So that's kind of an update on my plant and tank here. I put in some neons, again, that I got from my neighbor. And then Cory Cats. There's the albino. He's just freaking awesome. Since I threw him in the tank, there's just no algae existence. There's my little Pictus still. He cruises around every now and again. Loves to kind of eat off the neon's food as well. Mostly because I don't know if they realize that the food's up there or they just kind of wait until it starts floating down. And then this kind of is a nice piece too. I got this again at Petco. Just a little spider plant. But the root structure is by far my favorite part of this plant because it's growing down into the water. I think as it spreads out more and just more roots keep growing down, it's going to offer a really cool effect to this tank. I did pick up more Malaysian driftwood at this auction. I got that for about $20 for almost all that you see in this tank. Except for that piece and one of the bigger pieces there, and I actually still have a couple extra left over. I have a do-it-yourself CO2 system. With this, I kind of ran a test. I started off with this, just a fluval sponge for one of their little smaller hang-on-back filters. I started off with this guy on it. I ran that for about a week. And then I ran this for about a week. And there was some pretty noticeable differences. The plants seemed to be a lot more perkier without the sponge than they were with the sponge on there. And I'm not sure if that's just because of how it's distributing it through the tank or what. CO2 is still kind of new to me. I used to do cichlid tanks, which don't obviously involve CO2 or really not much of noticeability for nutrients and everything else to keep them going. But again, some more little Anubias down here I thought would look cool right down at the base of my main branches here. Well, and that's pretty much about it. This tank I did not do any sort of hang on the back filtration or anything like that. I read a lot of surface agitation can kind of diffuse the CO2 to where it just is not as effective. So I had some sponge filters left over. So I took one of those, ran some just regular tubing up with some plumber's tape, and then I put this little wire fixture on, which seems to help kind of make the water flow out of this power head. But that's really about it. I will put up some pictures about how the tank started, and that way you guys can kind of see a lot of the new growth that's happened on it. And I'll start probably doing these at about a weekly basis, because that seems to be the most I noticed the difference in the growth in this tank. There is a bunch of new growth, which I know Dustin says is pretty much the most important part, which all that is new growth since I've added these crypts into the tank. There is a bunch of new growth off of like little nanas, but they're kind of hard to see with my crappy camera. Tons of new growth off of my swords going on. New growth off of whatever this plant is. I'm not sure what it is. Again, it is something I got off the auction. After watching basically every video Dustin had, the one thing I came to realize is any plant with a huge, thick root structure can pretty much do well just about anywhere. So that's kind of why I got it, figuring if nothing else, this was just a plant that was going to do well, period. And it's doing insanely well. There's whole new root structures coming off because I trimmed most of the old root structure off of the plant to allow it to adapt to my water. And there's tons of little new plants, if you guys can see them, coming off of them. And there's actually another one here in the background, which is kind of decided to curve off and then have a new little sproutlet coming off of him. So, pretty excited about this tank. It's kind of took over my favorite of plants versus cichlids. I love my cichlids still, but not as much as I think I'm starting to like planting tanks. Look forward to definitely more videos. Me and a couple of my buddies are eventually going to be starting up our own little kind of .com fish tank store here in Longmont, Colorado. To kind of just offer some of our experience, then also some of what we bring up